Now, the road to change and reform has been rocky. Many in Ukraine don't know what to make of this Ukrainian-American doctor, this soft-spoken yet tough and fearless health minister who wakes up at 3 a.m., walks to work with her backpack, and ends her day late at night. And yet, against all odds, keeps breaking barriers and forging ahead despite opposition, resistance, criticism, and even being targeted by smear campaigns. With her incredible perseverance and persistence, she will not give up, she will not be broken, she is not corruptible, and she always strives to do the right thing. All because of her love of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. She is a true Ukrainian patriot. Я маю велику честь представити вам нашого головного доповідача Ulana Suprun.
Дякую. Добрий вечір, good evening. Thank you for the very warm welcome. They've asked me to deliver my remarks in English, so I will, mostly, and I hope nothing will get lost in the translation. I'm honored today to be speaking at the golden anniversary of the Ukrainian World Congress. I want to thank Yevhen Sholi, Stefan Romanyov, and Irka Mitsak for inviting me to speak tonight. Christina Waller and MPP Yvonne Baker for arranging very productive meetings today with the Minister of Health of Ontario, Eric Hoskins, the telehealth and telemedicine teams, and representatives of Sick Kids Hospital, including Dr. Miroslava Romach, who is doing great work in Ukraine. You know, I remember coming to Toronto for SKVU conferences back before we dropped the V in SKVU. This event is the culmination of a full year of celebration, from Brussels to Kyiv and Lviv, in New York, and now here in Canada, where the most active Ukrainian community resides. These milestones are a time when we reflect upon the past, evaluate the current state of affairs, and contemplate our future. A very long time ago, Petrarch climbed the mountain Ventoux to see things differently. And this ushered in the Renaissance that laid a very solid foundation for the Enlightenment. As you know, the Enlightenment brought forth ideas that were founded on evidence-based reasoning, and this was the source of authority and legitimacy in all walks of life. And this provided an opportunity for ideas like liberty, progress, tolerance, constitutional government, and the separation of church and state. The scientific method, that body of techniques used to investigate life, acquire new knowledge, and most importantly, the openness and willingness to correct past mistakes, to integrate what was previously known. Even in Ukraine at that time, an organization was founded in Lviv with the mandate of cultural development, consolidation of civil society, and to increase the national consciousness of the Ukrainian people. It founded libraries, published books, opened bookstores, theaters, and museums. Many of the state secretaries of the Ukrainian National Republic were members of that organization, called, very appropriately, Prosvita. As oxymoronic as it sounds, a new enlightenment is beginning in Ukraine, and it was started by Ukraine's silovi struktury, or security forces. The Russian invasion of Ukraine forced upon history, more directly on Ukraine in the form of foreign agents acting as political parties wrapped in the blue and yellow, the beginning of a new renaissance that laid the foundation for a new enlightenment. And this process, because of the will of the people of Ukraine, is being accelerated. And I believe that Kyiv will be the center of this new 21st century enlightenment, one that is being realized by the forces of light in the government and security services, and even more poignantly, this new enlightenment is being nurtured by Ukrainian civil society. For example, the small NGO that SKU helped to launch decided that its slogan would be "Prosvitnitstvo через medicinu," or enlightenment through medicine. We all know the answer to the brutal crackdown of students when over 1 million Ukrainians took to the streets. not to settle a score, but to protect their future from being robbed from them. We all know the answer to the occupation of Crimea. Ukrainians took in thousands of displaced Crimeans into their homes, making the family, the simya, that safe haven it has always been in Ukrainian traditions. We also know the answer to the Russian invasion of the Donbass. Hundreds of thousands of volunteers raced to the front, almost with absolutely nothing, to stop the Russian advance. When the government institutions organized their response, those same volunteers stayed to help those who made the choice to give all they had and defend Ukraine. The international Ukrainian Hromada sent humanitarian aid to internally displaced persons and to soldiers on the front. Almost 2 million people have been internally displaced, and despite the fear-mongering by some in Western Europe who spread fakes that Ukrainians were going to be the next refugee wave in Europe, well, that simply hasn't happened. And all of this is convincing evidence that Ukrainians want to build a new Ukraine, free and independent. Is Ukraine moving forward? Yes. Education reform, pension reform, medical reform, and most recently, the changes adopted by Parliament to the election codex show that Ukraine is moving forward. Are there problems? Yes, but the number of problems that Ukraine faces is not the result of the reforms and changes currently underway. They simply are. Trying to attribute ownership to a problem will only waste time. There will always be problems. Success, though, is measured by the manner in which we address those problems. But doing nothing, leaving the system in place as is, that is the measure of failure. During Special Forces training that I've been lucky to be a part of, there's a unit that uses real bullets, not blanks, during their training. There's a point in their training when someone armed, providing cover, yells, "Problema," when his firearm jams up. Then another member of his team comes to his side to take his place and provide cover fire for the others. This is Ukraine today. Be it in government, civil society, or with our international partners, if the tools at our disposal jam up, a member of the unit will be there to protect the team. The Canadian program Unifier at Yavoriv Base is a very good example of that kind of international teamwork. The U.S. Department of Justice program with the new patrol police is another. The United Kingdom's program with medical training is another. And the European Union's program helping to reform the ministries is yet another, as is the teamwork that we've seen with our international partners at the Ministry of Health, the World Health Organization, the World Bank, EDGE, USAID, the Swiss Development Corporation, GIZ, and many others providing aid in the healthcare reform process. But one thing that these programs have in common is that they are no longer aimed at simply giving something. Rather, when you strip away the pomp and the circumstance, they are educational. And they include training. The same security services I referred to earlier now rely on evidence to advance their training programs beyond the old Soviet model. Their lives and the lives of their brothers in arms depend on how accurate, applicable, and useful the information and training is that they get. They never simply trust what is said. They always look for the evidence. Having mostly Soviet or post-Soviet experience, they never used to think of their lives as something of great value. That's why medical training was never a priority, and first aid skills were something only reserved for doctors. That's why bringing the concept of tactical medicine made the most elite units completely change their tactics and training procedures. And it changed their outlook on life and on Ukraine. They were no longer the object of the whims of a dictator, but became the subject for the defense of Ukraine. Today, Ukrainian servicemen and women are among the highest trusted institutions, only after the church and volunteers. Special Forces units were some of the first to receive training in life-saving techniques. One of those Special Forces soldiers was wounded, but he knew what to do, had an IFAC, and was evacuated by his brothers. He survived. And just a few months ago, he was here in Canada as part of the Invictus Games, and won 4 gold medals for Team Ukraine. Does training make a difference beyond the obvious? Does it engender a change that advances society from traditional to modern? On Ukrainian Independence Day this year, an IED exploded right next to the Cabinet of Ministers building, and 2 people were wounded. The soldier, who didn't hesitate and provided the needed care, applied bandages, and passed the wounded on to the medics, sounds like a typical thing here in the Western world. But he was trained because he knew what to do. As an example, back in 2014, the National Guard had lost many members on the front. In August of 2015, as you remember, a grenade was thrown into the National Guardsmen near the Verkhovna Rada, and 3 of those men lost their lives that day. Only after that loss did they agree to sign a memorandum of understanding and change their training programs. Real change sometimes takes time, effort, and passion, but it also requires determined patience, never to give up. There are always questions about how we can help as a hromada, how we can improve these humanitarian programs. Up until very recently, most humanitarian aid coming to Ukraine has been in the form of stuff, containers of it, be it hospital equipment, tents, supplies, etc. This is very noble work. Even though Ukraine may be a rich country, there are still many people living in poverty that need our help. At the same time, we have to be careful that we don't breed dependencies. Someone once said that humanitarian aid can breed dependencies. Education starves dependencies and helps make people free. Humanitarian aid that focuses on things can eventually do just that. Remember, give someone a fish and you feed them for a day. Teach someone to fish and you feed them for a lifetime. Humanitarian programs that build lifelong relationships that empower people to share knowledge are those programs that will change the world for the better. For example, Tom Monastyrsky is currently heading up part of the police program between Canada and Ukraine, and they've established lifelong relationships with their fellow officers in Ukraine. The Canada-Ukraine Parliamentary Program has created a countrywide network of young professionals who are committed to improving government services and building a new Ukraine. And our ambassador, Vashchuk, manages to keep all of this going forward. I'm convinced sometime in the future, the world will remember the enormous contribution of 3 names that have made toward building a new international framework for cooperation: Vashchuk, Freeland, and Vinnik. Canada has, for good reason, a large amount of moral authority in the world, and that should be applauded and reproduced elsewhere. So why is educational humanitarian aid important today? Relating to the medical system, let me give you 3 numbers that define medicine in Ukraine today: 104, 34, and 0.3. Ukraine has a system in place where students graduating from 11th grade take a standardized placement exam called a ZNO. The possible range of scores is from 100 to 200. 100 you get just for showing up, and 200 is a perfect score. For law school, the average score for students getting in is about 180. For engineering, it's about 170. Guess what the minimum requirement for medical school is? 104, the lowest of all professions. Now, for the entering class in 2018, the new Ministry of Health has raised the minimum score required to 150. We'll be getting better students to enter medical school. The second number, 34. This year, the Ministry of Health added 30 questions from the U.S. medical licensing exam to the Step 3 or Krok 3 exam that medical students take after their internship. A passing grade is 70%. The average score in all of Ukraine was 34% on those questions. Only 3% of those who took the exam got 70% or better on those questions. The Ministry of Health is moving towards using standardized exams from the US MLE for all 3 exams in Ukraine, so that we can elevate the level of Ukrainian physicians. The last number, 0.3. As you know, the English language is the language of medicine. 98% of all peer-reviewed medical journals are written in English. Most medical conferences throughout the world are in English. A survey was recently done in Ukraine, and only 0.3% of all doctors in polyclinics understand or speak English. That's a real problem if you're trying to keep up with the most current medical care. English will now be required for all graduating physicians. These recent events have shown that challenges are not as insurmountable as one might assume. When you take the time to sit down and explain the reform process using rational examples and real-world experience like that which is in Canada, in the UK, and elsewhere, it's possible to convince people about the merits of change rather than using old-school quid pro quo tactics. The medical system of any country reflects the history, politics, and culture of the people, as well as the result of science and education. To blindly copy one system and stick it into another is impossible, but one can always and should always learn from one another. The change of the healthcare system in Ukraine is a transformational movement which starts with every patient, every physician, every administrator, and most important, from families, from the семьи. I'd like you to also consider other work that's being done in Ukraine that has helped to create a change in the system. The project Stop Fake from the Mohila School of Journalism is a small team of dedicated students and faculty, and they show how they can make a difference in dispelling Kremlin disinformation. And this is very important work that needs to be supported. Even here in Toronto, someone started to share a fake story about me, and that questioned my credentials and capacity regarding the programs that we've started to change the healthcare system in Ukraine. The root of this problem is the lack of a new form of literacy, specifically called media literacy. This is something that Yevhen Fedchenko, director of the Kyiv-Mohila School of Journalism, is addressing in countless workshops and masterclasses throughout Ukraine, and through the Stop Fake project, whose aim is to debunk Kremlin myths and propaganda. You know, there are two universities in Ukraine that are leading the way forward: the Ukrainian Catholic University and the University of Kyiv-Mohila Academy. Both of these universities need your support. The challenge is to build multi-million-dollar endowments that will help Ukrainian students realize their full potential and continue to build upon innovations inspired at these two universities. An endowment like this will break certain barriers that these two universities face and be that insurance that the changes currently underway in Ukraine will become irreversible. And their work will inspire other universities to improve upon their systems to attract new students. The marketplace of ideas requires the support of the diaspora. Because the future of Ukraine is in the hands of the students. They will realize and continue this new enlightenment. But they are like the mustard seed. The mustard seed is one of the smallest seeds, 1 or 2 millimeters in diameter. The definition of fragile. We've all felt that way sometime in our lives. But the mustard seed, despite its fragility, has the potential to upset your expectations. Under the right conditions, a mustard seed can grow into a mustard tree, as high as 25 feet tall. Skill and talent need cultivation. That cultivation is education. Education is the cultivation of a new generation of Ukrainians that will build a better future for future generations. I look around here today and I see many new friends, many old friends, those new people that I've met. We're here today celebrating the Ukrainian World Congress's 50th anniversary. The strongest contributions that the Ukrainian World Congress has made are the enlightenment programs rearing generations of Ukrainians in the diaspora through education to defend, protect, and develop their individual and dear Ukrainian self, their Ukrainian identity, their Ukrainian ya. Make no mistake, that Ukrainian identity has been under assault for centuries, but through concerted efforts by ourselves, our families, and our social institutions, we preserved that Ukrainian identity. And I am convinced that the Ukrainian World Congress has the wherewithal, the talent, the strength, and the know-how to continue the work of the Enlightenment for 50 more years, side by side with Ukraine. Thank you for listening to me tonight. Slava Ukraini!
Дуже дякуємо, доктор Супрун. Бажаємо великих успіхів в майбутньому. У вашій програмці бенкету знаходиться короткий огляд заходів, які